Welcome. Many of you watching may not have been encouraged to talk about or even think about your feelings when you were younger. Just get on with it. And of course, resilience is essential and can be very admirable and useful. And dare I say it, resilience is something maybe some of the youngsters could do with a little more of. But they may get one thing right that we don't do so well on, and that's talking about these issues. Now, we're increasingly understanding the connection between our thoughts and how they make us feel, and all sorts of other very important outcomes, not only in terms of mind, but also in terms of our body and our physical well-being. And we're now going to hear from another expert in this area, someone I admire very highly, Dr. Tony Hope.
My name is Tony Hope. I'm a specialist in mental illness and mental health. When we are faced with an illness, and particularly if it's a chronic illness, then of course it's particularly common for us to feel low and anxious. And one of the things that I became very interested in was how we could help people without necessarily turning to medication. And I also became interested in what people could do to help themselves, and particularly early on when they're having a problem, because one of the issues that I kept seeing again and again were people with problems that they'd had for a long time, but they were only now seeking help. And had they had help earlier, help that they could even give themselves, then they would not have come to such a difficult situation. Sometimes I'm almost cross with myself, thinking I shouldn't be low or anxious. But that's actually not helpful. So the first point I want to make is that we have to be kind to ourselves when we feel low and anxious, and accept that that's normal. But the second point, which I think is perhaps the most important point, is that it's useful to see feeling low or feeling anxious as calls to action. I'm going to talk about three main steps. One focuses on people and relationships, one on exercise, and the third on giving ourselves treats. So let me start by talking about people and relationships. Research has shown that relationships reduce the chance of us feeling low, but also when we do feel low, our relationships can be the most important thing to help us out from that difficult position. So in thinking about how we might make a difference when we're feeling low, how we might help ourselves to get out from that, it's useful to think, are there any people with whom we can talk openly about our difficulties and get support, on the one hand, but on the other hand also think about, are there groups of people with whom we can do something we enjoy, go for a walk, read, a cup of tea or coffee. The second point I want to focus on is the importance of exercise. Exercise is important for our physical health, and good physical health is helpful for good mental health. But second, exercise can also improve mood quite independently from improvements in physical health. Now, I'm somebody who finds exercise extremely boring, to be honest, but I have chronic difficulties with my back and my shoulders, and have sought expert help on what exercises to carry out. And despite finding it boring, I make sure that I do regular exercise through the week in order to reduce the problems that I might have in the future. The third issue I want to discuss is the value of giving ourselves treats, positive, things that we enjoy. And again, certainly I find that when my mood is low, that's a time when I think I don't enjoy anything. There's nothing that I would enjoy. Or even worse, I sometimes feel I'm not worth trying to think about what I would enjoy. But the point I want to make is that even when we feel low, or perhaps particularly when we feel low, it's helpful to make sure one does some of those activities that at least you used to enjoy. It's not surprising that when we have health problems that we start to worry. And indeed, often the experience that we have in hospital or with our doctors and nurses can just increase those worries because they tend to talk about the worst case scenarios. And so what I want to talk about is 3 stages of dealing with worries. So the first stage is clarifying exactly what the worry is. This is important because unless you know exactly what you're worrying about, we can't then plan how we're going to deal with those worries. When we feel worried, it's often not as clear as we might think what it is we're worrying about. We have some sort of vague worry or something that we haven't really put into words. And the problem with that is we can just go on worrying and worrying without ever beginning to deal with the worry. So this first stage of clarifying what the worry is the key to the other 2 stages. So this first stage is to try to pin down exactly what it is that is worrying us. This may sometimes be obvious, but if it isn't, it can help to talk to someone else and to try to explain what the worry is, and they can help us to clarify it. And it can be very useful, particularly when we go on to the next 2 stages, very useful to write down exactly what the worry or worries are about, and what feels like a single worry may turn out to be 2 or 3 different worries. So this first stage is trying to clarify exactly what it is that we're worrying about. Having tried to get clear what the worry is, the second stage is then to get that worry into perspective. There are 3 things that we often worry about that are not worth worrying about. And so the first stage of getting into perspective is to see whether the worries fall into one of these 3 categories. The first category is the unimportant. So I certainly find that I can find myself worrying about something of really very little importance, and yet it's still making me feel anxious and upset. Something I find quite useful to do is to sort of say to myself, how much worry is this actually worth? And that's a way really of saying, of finding out how important this worry is to me. And often it's not worth very much. The second is how likely is the worry to happen. And this is very common, I think, when we've had health problems. We then start to worry about extremely unlikely bad outcomes. And worrying about something that's hardly ever going to happen. I mean, if we think about that over our lives would be nothing but worry if we worried about things that are unlikely to happen. So if something is unlikely to happen, then I try to tell myself it's not worth worrying about. I should set that aside. And the third perspective and the third kind of worry to set to one side are the unresolved worries. There's a useful proverb, don't cross bridges until you come to them. And again, in the setting of when we've had health problems, it's very easy to cross all the bridges. You know, we have some pain somewhere, we go to the doctor says, well, let's do some blood tests, and you start worrying about the worst outcome of those blood tests rather than taking things one stage at a time. So when I've got issues that could have long-term bad consequences, I try to remind myself just to go through things step by step and not to cross too many bridges at once. So, in summary, having got our worry clear, try and get a perspective and try to put aside any worry that is unimportant, that is unlikely, or that is unresolved. Not all worries, of course, can be set aside. There are some worries that we will have to deal with. And in this situation, I find it helpful to use what I call the worry decision tree. The ideas behind the worry decision tree go back to Epictetus, the first century Stoic philosopher. And essentially, what the worry decision tree asks us to do is answer three questions. What am I worrying about? Is there anything I can do about this? Is there anything I can do right now? Let me just go through these three questions one by one. So question one, what am I worrying about? It's why I suggested it's useful to write down what the worry is when you've clarified the worry, because then you can bring that clear articulation of the worry to this first stage. What am I worrying about? Question two, is there anything I can do about this? If the answer is no, then there's no point in worrying. And what I try to do in that situation is to set the worry aside and to distract myself, because it's not always easy just to say, well, I'm going to stop worrying about this, so get on with something else. But I stop myself from coming back to worrying about that again and again, because I know there is nothing I can do about that. If, on the other hand, the answer is yes, there is something you can do about that worry, then we come to the third question. Is there something you can do right now? Now, if the answer is yes to that, then it's best to do that, to do whatever it is that you can do to help resolve the worry, rather than procrastinating, rather than putting that off. But the answer might be, yes, there is something that can be done about this worry, but I can't do that right now. It might involve someone else. It might involve me doing something that I can't do immediately. In which case, it's helpful, again, to be clear with oneself. What do you have to do to get to the stage where you can then deal with the worry? Now, this worry decision tree does sound a bit simple. The difficulty, of course, is in keeping to it, because we keep distracting ourselves with the worry, coming back to a worry again and again without actually dealing with it. And the lesson I take from the worry decision tree is to keep reminding me that I either deal with a worry or have a plan to deal with it, or I set the worry aside, because there is just no point in worrying. It's useful to keep a gratitude diary. Now, this was something new to me in my professional life, and something that my daughter encouraged me to keep, and I've found really effective. So let me go through how I do it, and people can adapt to whatever suits them. So towards the end of the day, I reflect on the day and write down, and this is only to take a couple of minutes, 3 things in the day that are positive for me, 3 things for which I can give gratitude that they happened. And in a way, I purposely choose both smaller things and big things. So the smaller thing can be, I enjoyed a drink, a coffee, perhaps enjoyed a coffee out at a cafe. It can be a much bigger thing, like I saw my granddaughter. But I do try to make sure that I'm not repeating myself every day. So if I said the cup of coffee yesterday, I won't put it in. The next day, I'll think of something else. So that has helped me to improve my mood, but also protected me against periods of low mood. What I've been saying may sound very simple, but they can make a huge impact, a transformational change. And essentially that's because what one naturally does when one feels anxious or low is behave in ways that make that all the worse. And by making simple changes in one's life, you can turn what was a vicious cycle into a virtuous cycle.
My name's Rod Bradford, and I come to different sorts of sessions. I started coming here just over 18 months ago. The reason being that I was under the doctors and they said that my body and soul was getting in a bit of a state. It started off with type 2 diabetes. I was diagnosed with prostate cancer. Lucky enough, very, very early, so I'm not even under treatment, just observation. And at that point, I sort of let myself go and think to myself, yeah. I mean, I'd put weight on, I'd just sit around, seeing the great-grandchildren. Yeah, play with them when they came, but yeah, it was just... And that was it. I just thought, I've got to do something. And then my diabetic nurse sort of gave me the, this is not the way to do it, you know. And they've referred me here, and I've been coming there ever since. I normally come here after doing an hour session at one of the other gyms. I also do step and weights, circuit training, and aqua aerobics. When I first started, it just started off as circuit training, and it just grew, shall we say. You get addicted to it, and it's great. Changed diet slightly, less fatty foods and more healthy foods, and the benefits are incredible. I've lost nearly 2.5 stone since May last year. I've found now that I can run around with my great-grandchildren and play with them. I feel a lot happier, a lot healthier. Wish I'd done it years sooner. I'm glad that I was actually referred to something like this. I'd recommend it to anybody. Ish. I can be a guide for somebody that are sitting there thinking, oh, I wish I couldn't do that. I'm now 75 and I wish I'd done it years ago. Anybody can do it.
As you can see, it's a two-way street. Keeping your body active can have a profound impact on your mind. Now, the good news, I hope, is that you now have some techniques, some resources that you can use so you can experience the benefits firsthand of managing your mind.